The world had always believed that Earth was safe, tucked away in the far corner of the Milky Way, far from the chaos of galactic wars. For centuries, humanity had advanced in its own ways, technology, science, and culture growing stronger. Yet in the vastness of space, Earth had remained an insignificant dot, unnoticed by the greater powers of the galaxy. But that was before the Volrath arrived. It started with a tremor, a ripple in the fabric of space itself. At first, it was dismissed as an anomaly, something out of the ordinary, but hardly a cause for alarm. However, a series of strange signals, unlike anything human technology had encountered, followed shortly after. As the days passed, Earth's monitoring stations started to detect more massive ships, unknown designs, approaching at impossible speeds. The Volrath were here, and they were not coming to make peace. Sergeant James Jim Carter had seen his share of battles, but nothing could have prepared him for the scale of this. Stationed at the Mars military outpost, a small and seemingly insignificant base on the Red Planet, he had spent years preparing for minor skirmishes, never imagining that Earth itself would one day be threatened by an alien invasion. Jim's unit, primarily tasked with monitoring the surrounding planets and maintaining defenses in the region, wasn't prepared for a full-scale attack by a species as advanced and brutal as the Volrath. The first wave hit with ferocity. Earth's defense network was quickly overwhelmed. The Volrath fleet was vast. Hundreds of enormous warships, each equipped with destructive weapons capable of obliterating entire cities in seconds. Earth's military responded with what they had, but their best was no match for the alien firepower. Jim stood in the command room of the Mars outpost, his gaze fixed on the holographic display that showed the alien fleet advancing toward Mars. The red, blinking icons signified ships, huge, triangular vessels, their shields reflecting sunlight in patterns that made them look like monstrous predators hunting down prey. The gravity of the situation settled in his gut like a stone. Sergeant Carter came the voice of Colonel Hawthorne, his commanding officer, cutting through the tension. You and your team are to prepare for engagement. The Volrath are targeting Mars as their first landing site. We can't hold them off for long. Our priority is to delay their landing until reinforcements arrive from Earth. Jim's mind raced. Reinforcements? They were light years away, and the Volrath fleet was already here. Mars had no chance of standing up to such a force, but the colonel was right. There was no other choice. It was a last stand, one that Jim and his team had trained for, but never thought they would actually face. Yes, sir, Jim replied, his voice steady despite the churn of uncertainty within him. He quickly gathered his squad. Lana, the tech expert, Alex, the heavy weapons specialist, and 3 other soldiers who had trained under him. They were the best Mars had to offer, but even the best were no match for a species capable of wiping out entire worlds. The base shook as another blast from a Volrath ship echoed through the atmosphere. The walls rattled and alarms blared. The invaders were already starting their assault on the outer perimeter of the base. Everyone, gear up, Jim barked, his orders cutting through the chaos. We're going to buy Earth some time. That's all we can do. As the team quickly prepared, Jim couldn't help but think of Earth, his family, his friends, the millions of lives that were now in the hands of a few soldiers stranded on a foreign planet. His fingers tightened around his rifle as the weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. This wasn't just about Mars. It was about humanity's survival. The Volrath warships loomed overhead, their engines cutting through the Martian sky, casting long shadows across the barren surface. On the ground, soldiers scrambled into position, preparing defensive lines and setting traps that would delay the Volrath for as long as possible. Jim's team moved quickly, their training kicking in, but the feeling of helplessness lingered. The Volrath ships were so massive, their technology so advanced, that every action they took seemed like a futile attempt to fight back a force of nature. Sergeant, the Volrath are already landing, Lana said, her voice tight with urgency. They're deploying ground forces. Jim nodded grimly. We'll make them pay for every inch. They set out in a convoy of military trucks. moving quickly toward the eastern edge of the base where the Volrath had begun to land. Their transport skidded to a halt, and Jim's team disembarked, weapons at the ready. In the distance, he could see the glint of alien technology, drones, massive alien walkers, and more ships descending to the surface. "We don't have much time," Jim said, surveying the battlefield. "Let's make it count." As the first Volrath forces approached, Jim knew one thing. This would be the fight of humanity's life. And he, Sergeant James Carter, would be at the heart of it. The air around Mars' outpost felt thicker now, heavy with the scent of burning metal and the distant hum of alien machinery. The Volrath were relentless, and their landing craft were already scarring the Martian landscape. Jim Carter stood before his team, eyeing the distant horizon where the Volrath's massive ships towered above the desolate red sands. The time for hesitation had passed. Now, there was only one goal: survival. "All right, listen up," Jim said, his voice sharp and commanding. He looked over his team, Lana, Alex, and the others, each of them battle-hardened, but even they knew this wasn't going to be like any fight they'd faced before. The odds were impossible, and the stakes were as high as they could get. "We hold the line here. The Volrath want Mars, but they're not getting it without a fight. We buy Earth time, we delay them, and we show them why they picked the wrong planet to mess with." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "With a last bastion. If we fall, Earth falls." "Understood." "Yes, sir." Lana, the tech expert, gave a sharp nod. Her fingers were already dancing across her tablet, rerouting communications and syncing their weapon systems. She was the brain of the team, quick-witted and always one step ahead. Alex cracked his knuckles, a grin forming on his face. "I've been waiting for this, Sergeant." The rest of the squad echoed their readiness, but it was clear they were all on edge. The Volrath were not just another enemy. They were a living nightmare, and they were closing in. Jim led his team to the eastern perimeter, a ridge that overlooked the Volrath landing zone. The Martian soil beneath their boots was harsh and unforgiving, but Jim didn't care. They would hold this ground no matter what. "We've got incoming," Alex muttered, scanning the horizon through his binoculars. "Looks like they've deployed ground units. Drones, walkers, maybe even more troops." The first wave of Volrath ground units appeared on the horizon, like dark shadows creeping toward them. Massive alien war machines, towering and armed with devastating weapons. Their footsteps were like thunder on the Martian surface as they marched forward, their mechanical legs crushing the rocky ground beneath them. "We gotta slow them down," Jim said, pointing to the high ground. "Lana, I need those drones online." "Alex, get to that sniper perch on the ridge and take out their heavy artillery. Everyone else, with me. We're gonna hit them fast and hard." The plan was simple: hit the Volrath where it hurt, disrupt their landing forces, and make sure they never got a foothold on Mars. But Jim knew the truth. This wasn't about winning. It was about buying humanity time. The real battle was still to come, and it was far from guaranteed. The team spread out, each moving to their assigned positions. Lana worked quickly, tapping commands into her device to activate the base's defense drones, while Jim's squad set up explosives, rigging traps in the Martian dust. Every move was deliberate, calculated. They couldn't afford mistakes. In the distance, the Volrath ground forces began to take shape, sleek, metallic walkers carrying soldiers in armored exoskeletons, their weapons glinting in the pale sunlight. They were unlike anything Jim had ever seen. The machines were fast, precise, and efficient, and their soldiers moved with chilling coordination. The Volrath were no strangers to war, and they fought with a ferocity that made Earth's military seem small by comparison. "Ready on your mark, Sergeant." Lana's voice crackled through the comms. "Now," Jim ordered. The first volley of fire came from Alex's sniper rifle, cutting through the air like a crack of thunder. A Volrath walker stumbled as the shot pierced its outer armor, sending sparks flying. The alien machine staggered and fell, but it wasn't enough to stop the tide of invaders. More walkers advanced, their guns blazing as they retaliated with a storm of laser fire. "Get down," Jim shouted, pulling Lana and the others to the ground as enemy fire whizzed overhead. The Martian landscape lit up with explosions as the alien walkers unleashed their fury. Despite the heavy assault, the team fought back with everything they had. Jim's soldiers were quick, agile, and relentless, using the terrain to their advantage. Lana's drones swarmed around the Volrath, disorienting them and drawing their fire away from the soldiers. Jim and his team moved like shadows, striking where the enemy was weakest. But it wasn't enough. The Volrath were too numerous, and their firepower was overwhelming. The Martian base was beginning to fall bit by bit. Jim watched as one of his soldiers, Corporal Kessler, was hit by a blast, his body flung into the air before crashing to the ground, lifeless. Damn it, Jim swore under his breath. The loss of Kessler stung, but there was no time for mourning. The fight wasn't over. As the Volrath forces closed in, Jim made a snap decision. We fall back to the secondary defense line. Now, the team regrouped, sprinting to their next position. The Martian sky above them was filled with the hum of alien ships and the roar of distant explosions. Earth's future rested on the shoulders of these few soldiers, and Jim wasn't about to let them down. Hold fast, Jim ordered as they took their new positions. We're not done yet. The battle on Mars was becoming a war of attrition. Jim Carter could feel the weight of the conflict pressing down on him with every passing hour. The Volrath forces had almost reached the heart of the Mars outpost, and his soldiers were starting to buckle under the pressure. But Jim wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He had to do something drastic to turn the tide. Sergeant Carter, Lana's voice crackled over the comms, pulling Jim from his thoughts. I've got something. It's not much, but it might give us a shot. Jim turned toward her, his eyes scanning the horizon where Volrath war machines continued to land, their sheer size casting ominous shadows across the Martian landscape. What have you got, Lana? I've been digging through the old military archives, she said, her voice urgent. There's an old comms relay buried beneath the base. It's ancient, but I think it can interface with the Volrath's communications network. If I can hack into their systems, we might be able to disrupt their command and control structure. We could disorient them long enough to strike back. Jim took a moment to process the idea. It was a risky plan. Distracting the Volrath by messing with their communications could cause chaos, but could also backfire. If they miscalculated, they could expose themselves to even greater danger. How long? Jim asked, his face tight with concern. An hour, maybe less, Lana replied. But we'll need to move quickly. Jim didn't hesitate. Get to it. Alex, cover her. The rest of US will hold this line for as long as we can. The team moved into action. Lana and Alex sprinted toward the old comm station while Jim and the others continued to fight off the Volrath ground forces. The Martian terrain was a hellish battlefield now. Dust, craters, and burning wreckage scattered across the plains. The alien war machines continued to advance, and the hum of their energy weapons filled the air. Jim's rifle barked as he fired at a Volrath soldier in a bulky exoskeleton, sending the alien tumbling backward. The teamwork and coordination of the Volrath troops were unnerving, and they kept coming relentlessly. Every soldier on Jim's team was doing their best to hold the line, but they were outgunned, outnumbered, and outmatched. Get down, Alex shouted from his sniper perch, his voice tense. He fired a shot that took down a Volrath walker, the explosion sending a shockwave through the ground. Nice shot, Jim grunted, firing on a different target. But even with Alex's incredible sniping skills, the Volrath weren't slowing down. Lana's voice suddenly broke through the chaos. I'm in. The comms are scrambling, but I've got their main frequency. Get ready. Copy that. Jim responded, his pulse quickening. They were about to make their move. The air crackled with static as Lana worked her magic, bypassing the Volrath encryption protocols. Jim's eyes darted around the battlefield, counting every second. If this worked, the Volrath might lose their ability to coordinate, and that could give them the upper hand. If it didn't, well, they were out of options. Then it happened. A sudden burst of energy erupted from Lana's station, and Jim could feel the shift in the air. The Volrath forces faltered for a moment, their movements becoming erratic. The coordinated rush of walkers and drones stuttered, and for the first time since the battle began, the Volrath seemed unsure of their next move. "It's working," Lana shouted. "I've got their fleet on a loop. They can't communicate properly." "Perfect," Jim said, a grim smile spreading across his face. This was the break they needed. "Alex, take out their command unit." Now, Alex didn't hesitate. He adjusted his scope, his finger steady on the trigger. The rifle cracked, and a Volrath officer, surrounded by his elite guards, crumpled under the precise shot. With their commander down, the Volrath forces scattered, their once perfect formation disintegrating into disarray. "Now's our chance," Jim barked. "Push forward, hit them hard." With their enemies disoriented, the human soldiers seized the opportunity. Lana's drones swarmed the Volrath, distracting them long enough for the ground troops to close the distance. Jim led the charge, his rifle blazing as he picked off targets, his team moving like a well-oiled machine. The Volrath, normally so efficient in battle, were now scattered and vulnerable. Jim's squad took full advantage of the confusion, cutting down wave after wave of alien troops. The sound of gunfire was deafening, but for the first time, the human soldiers had the upper hand. A roar of triumph echoed in Jim's ears as another walker fell. But the battle wasn't over yet. Jim could see more Volrath ships descending, their reinforcements arriving in waves. This victory was just a small dent in the enemy's advance. "Lana, how much longer can you keep this up?" Jim asked urgently. "I've bought us some time," she replied, her voice strained. "But not much. We need to hit their supply depot before they regroup." Jim clenched his jaw. The battle had only begun, but for the first time, he felt the tide turning. They weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. "All right," Jim said, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "We hit them where it hurts. Let's go. This isn't over until they're all gone." The battle had raged for hours, and Jim Carter could feel the strain in his muscles, the exhaustion gnawing at him with each step. His team had done everything they could to hold back the Volrath, but the situation was slipping through their fingers. They had only delayed the inevitable, and as the last of the Martian base's defenses crumbled, Jim realized something important. The only way to win this fight now was to hit the Volrath where it would hurt the most. "Sergeant, we've got incoming." Alex's voice crackled through the comms, cutting through the tension. His words were clipped, his tone urgent. "The Volrath are sending in another wave. This one's bigger than before. They're not playing around anymore." Jim turned toward the horizon. He could see it now. More Volrath ships, dozens of them, descending from the sky like vultures descending on a wounded animal. The red Martian landscape stretched out before him, a scarred battlefield. The sounds of alien war machines and human gunfire filled the air. Jim gritted his teeth. "They're sending everything they have," Lana said, her voice calm but strained as she reviewed the latest intel. "They'll overrun us in minutes if we don't take out their command center." Jim knew that was the only option left. The Volrath had come prepared for a siege, but there was one advantage the humans still had: their knowledge of the terrain. The Volrath's command center, where their communications were being coordinated, was located in a deep crater on the outskirts of the base. It was their nerve center, and if they could destroy it, the Volrath would be left scrambling, unable to respond effectively to the chaos they had caused. "We're going after the command center," Jim said, determination hardening his voice. "We don't have much time. Move out and stay sharp. This is it, our last shot." The team moved quickly, slipping between the wreckage of the base, navigating the jagged Martian rocks. Their path was perilous, littered with debris from the initial bombardment. The air was thick with the smell of burning fuel and scorched earth. Jim felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. The fate of Mars, and perhaps Earth itself, rested on this one final assault. As they neared the crater, Jim took a moment to survey the Volrath's defenses. The alien forces had established a well-fortified perimeter, complete with anti-aircraft turrets and ground patrols. It would be a challenge to get in unnoticed, but Jim wasn't going to let that stop him. "We're going in silent," Jim ordered. "Lana, take down their perimeter sensors. Alex, provide cover fire. The rest of us will plant explosives on their command center." Lana nodded, her fingers flying over her tablet as she worked to disable the Valrath's surveillance systems. The quiet hum of her drones working in the background was the only sound as they carefully moved into position. Jim's heart raced as the team crouched low behind the rocky outcrop. "Perimeter's down," Lana whispered. "We have a clear path." "Let's move," Jim said, leading the charge. The team moved swiftly, their boots crunching on the Martian dust as they advanced toward the command center. They were close now, and Jim could feel the heat from the alien weaponry in the distance. The Valrath soldiers were focused on the main battlefield, unaware of the threat coming from the rear. "Explosives set," Alex reported, his voice calm, though Jim could hear the tension beneath it. "I've got eyes on the target." "Stand by," Jim said, as he gave a final check to the positioning of their charges. "We hit them hard and fast." With a sudden burst of movement, they sprinted toward the crater's edge, taking cover behind a massive rock formation. The Valrath Command Center, a sleek and intimidating structure, sat in the center of the pit. The air was thick with the hum of alien technology, and Jim knew that this was their chance. The heart of the Valrath invasion was within reach, and they had one shot to destroy it. "On my mark," Jim said, his voice tight. 3, 2, 1 now. In a blur of motion, Alex fired his sniper rifle, taking out a Valrath officer just outside the command center. At the same time, Lana deployed a small squadron of drones that launched a swarm of EMP bursts at the control panels inside the command center. Sparks flew from the structure, and the energy shields flickered. Jim gave the signal. "Go!" The team charged, sprinting toward the command center. Explosives were planted at the core, and within moments, the massive building began to shake. A blinding flash of light illuminated the Martian sky, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The explosion ripped through the heart of the Valrath command, sending a shockwave that reverberated across the battlefield. "Target destroyed," Lana shouted over the comms, her voice full of triumph. "The command center is down." But Jim didn't celebrate. The explosion had sent the Valrath into disarray, but the war was far from over. The Valrath had lost their coordination, but their ships still loomed overhead, and their ground forces were still strong. "All right, everyone," Jim said, a fierce determination in his voice. "We've taken out their command center. Now we finish this. For Earth." With that, Jim and his team turned toward the remaining Valrath forces, ready for the final push. They were down, but they weren't out. And Jim Carter, with his team by his side, was determined to make sure the Valrath paid for every inch of ground they had taken.